You know, the fuck ups are the lesson sometimes. And in a way, I encourage you to go out and try to fail. That sounds kind of perverse, but it's kind of like cold calling. Cold calling, the reason people struggle so much with cold calling is because they put so much pressure on every single call. Whereas if instead of trying to go for yeses or wins on every call, if your approach is that, hey, I'm just going to go and collect 100 no's today. But in this business, one opportunity, if you're doing it the right way and you're really disciplined and strategic about the deals you take, can change everything. And in this business, what's your highest and best use? We talk about that with assets all the time. What's its highest and best use? But we don't talk about that about ourselves and our talents. And, where best, say, take a gentleman like that. He can't be good at all of those things.
Do you see developers make?
The tactical stuff I can't really judge because I'm not a practitioner. But it's trying to cram 10 years of progress into one deal. It goes back to the comment I made earlier that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And so the guys that were really progressing, and doing exponential growth and just
real estate development. Real estate development. Land to legacy.
Welcome back to Real Estate Development Land to Legacy. We have Forth Heffner with us today, who is going to teach us a thing or two about real estate development, because what I've been doing for the last couple of years was not enough. Forth, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Gene.
Awesome. Well, so tell us a little bit about what you do and what, I don't know, how should I phrase this? What's good that we should discuss today?
Yeah, well, my perspective is going to be a little bit unique compared to a lot of your guests. I've listened to a few of your episodes, and you guys do a great job and really informative. But I am not actually in commercial development. I coach commercial development companies. And so I know a lot about commercial development by proxy, just from having been around it for years. And a lot of times in the early days, they would use certain phrases and acronyms. And, I didn't want to admit that I didn't really know what they were talking about. So I'd spend hours afterwards, going cleaning up my education and looking up what things meant. And so I have a little bit of a unique perspective when it comes to commercial real estate.
Interesting. So you're basically here to tell us how to not fuck up in our business. Is that a good way of describing it?
The fuck ups are the lesson sometimes. And in a way, I encourage you to go out and try to fail. It sounds kind of perverse, but it's kind of like cold calling. Cold calling, the reason people struggle so much with cold calling is because they put so much pressure on every single call. Whereas if instead of trying to go for yeses or wins on every call, if your approach is that, hey, I'm just going to go and collect 100 no's today, then, that resets the expectation level. And then when you get a couple positive phone calls or, at least somebody that's willing to sit down with you and listen, hear you out, then those feel like mega wins. And so maybe that's a little bit of a summation of what I do.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's a good way of looking at it. When I talk about development, I always talk about things that went wrong and every mistake that I made. Sometimes when I get done, I'm like, it sounds like I'm sounding too negative. But honestly, in development, it's so easy to screw up and lose a ton of money that I would rather talk about all of the things where I screwed up in the past or failed to prevent others from screwing up, that I would rather get it out and scare the hell out of guys that want to get into the field or owners that think that they could develop, and it would be easy to cool them down a bit, and then we could actually build from there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's pretty normal that you do that because that's how you learn. But also, our minds are wired for negativity. It's an evolutionary protection as a protective trait that we have to look out for bears and foxes and whatever other predators out there. And so, we focus on the negative. But in a kind of perverted way, that's what I like about commercial real estate is that it is so hard. When you do get wins, it's so euphoric, and it's, again, I'm not even involved in the day-to-day. I'm not making any cold calls on their behalf, my client's behalf. I'm not digging for dirt every day. But man, when they get a win, I feel it. I think like they do, and that's really rewarding. Actually, I have the best job in the world because I get to share in the wins, and I don't have to do any of the work.
Awesome. Well, One question that I would like to ask you, but hold on with your answer until we are close to be wrapping up, is I would like you to share one good piece of advice, one important lesson, something one takeaway that the listeners could get out of this episode. So I'll give you time to think about it while we talk, if you can do that. And then we'll come back and hopefully our listeners would stick around because I know that that's going to be a good one. Let's rewind a little bit back. So tell me how you got into this industry and where you see this industry going.
Yeah, I'll go back a little bit. So I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. My dad he owned a landscaping business, and it was nothing fancy, it was nothing special, but it provided decently well for our family. We never wanted for anything, but I worked weekends, summer breaks, spring break, things like that. That's what I did. I went and worked for my dad, and that was neat. I don't think I understood the value of those lessons back then. We weren't an overly sophisticated company in an underly sophisticated industry. My dad had a little bit of skill, though. He had a college degree and he understood economics. So I think he had a little bit more pedigree than maybe some competitors, and so I think that really benefited him. Growing up in that and seeing what he went through, and knowing that I never wanted to mow grass, frankly, swore I'd never work in that. I was going to go off to college and do great things and change the world. And so I went away to boarding school and went away to college. And then when I graduated college, I moved to Atlanta because I wanted to go to the big city and be a small fish in a big pond and just climb the ladder there. And I took a really low-paying job in a tower that gave me business cards, so that when I went home or went back to alumni events, people would think I was important. And those were the kind of shallow values I had back then. But a little bit of I never really made it there. And I went home for a summer to live with my parents on my way to grad school. And I worked for my dad for 2 months, doing a little bit of business development, things like that. And I thought, well, this ain't Hollywood, but I kind of like it. I like the latitude to go out and test things, try new things, and knock on doors and sort of spread my wings a little bit. And he gave me that, and that was really impactful. So I deferred grad school for one semester, and so I did that for 11 years with him. And that was in '08. And then 2011, we'd scaled pretty well, and things were looking up, even though we had a lot of chaos. We had some financial turmoil, some embezzlement by a key employee, and discovered that on a Tuesday. My dad died of a heart attack on the floor of the lobby of the office on that Friday. So 3 days later, he wasn't the healthiest guy in the world, so I don't want to attribute everything to that, but certainly it was a factor there. And so, my brother and I were still there. We took it over and ran with it, and just kind of sucked it up because we had to. We had people depending on that company to survive. And so, through that process, we were looking for new ways to innovate. One of the things in business sometimes you think is, I really think X or Y is a good idea. I really like to try that and see if that theory holds. But maybe I don't have the confidence to do it. Maybe I don't want to be the first guy through the wall that gets bloodied up, or maybe I don't have the capital to invest in that or to risk in that. And so we eventually hired a coach in 2015, and that was a life-changing experience for us. Just to have not only somebody that we could always go and lean on, or frankly just bitch to sometimes, and it opened us to a network of colleagues, competitors, but they were in other markets, so that didn't really matter. And they just opened their books to us, literally and figuratively. Some of the guys were much larger than us, and they could tell us about things that worked well for them and things that didn't work well. So just having that resource there was really amazing for us. And so, we carried on with that. And eventually that coach began inviting me to come and sub coach with him for some other clients while I still was involved running the family business. So about 2020, my brother approached me, said, "Hey, I can tell you, you really are passionate about the coaching thing. It seems to really fire you up." And I said, "Well, yeah, sure. That's totally true." And he said, "Why don't you let me buy your equity and you go do that full time?" And I wasn't ready to do that. I felt like I would be failing or bailing on my dad's legacy there. And so he kind of worked on me for 6 months. And then for another 6 months, we negotiated. And right in the middle of COVID, actually February of 2020 is when we executed that agreement. And I had no clients, and I went out on my own and did that, just started beating the streets. My first client was a commercial real estate developer, and it was a friend of mine. Our kids went to school together. Our wives were friends, and he was about, I don't know, 28, 29. He was running his family's third generation a holding company. They weren't really going into any development at that time. Everything had kind of gotten flattened out, gotten stagnant. And he came in and he wanted to bring some real life to it. And so when I approached him about that, he was very receptive to it. He's a very thoughtful guy, took his time, made the decision. And that's how I got into this industry. So that's a very long way of answering your question, Eugene.
Right, right. No, I mean that's amazing. So you did have some experience running the business, and sounds like you made a good exit because I'm sure the business was struggling at least for a little bit during the lockdowns. But you're doing what you love. And how do developers benefit from the coaching, the services that you provide?
Yeah, I think a lot of that goes back to our original conversation about the difficulties and how hard it is in this business and why so many people fail or give up. And a lot of it, there's a phrase in the military, they say flow is smooth and smooth is fast. And so that's sort of the approach is to, hey, let's pull back. Let's determine who it is we want to be, who we want to serve, who we want to go through this adventure with, and what their characteristics are and what our shared passion, vision, and values are. Let's really codify that, clarify that, and so that we're getting the right people in here and we're, respectfully encouraging the wrong people to seek excellence elsewhere, for lack of a better term. And so a lot of it's just setting that pathway to say, okay, this is where we're going. This is who we're going to do it with. And then having a program to make sure that we are disciplined about sticking to that path. And so again, slowing down and saying, we're going to do it. We understand that, one out of every 100 opportunities is going to hit. But in this business, one opportunity, if you're doing it the right way and you're really disciplined and strategic about the deals you take, can change everything. And they just begin to pile up on each other. That first client, they had 0 development deals going on at the time when we started working together. They were a decently large holding company, so they had some resources, but, they'll do about 200 million in developments this year. And, again, that first client, he's still a friend of mine. We're very close. But the way that I coach them is that my mind is kind of always running. I'm almost like a visionary in a sense for them where, for example, they were starting to really build up their net asset value for a while and it was really accelerating. And I had this number in my mind. It was, $1 billion. I wanted them to get to $1 billion net asset value. And I never told them that. But we were sitting in one of their sessions one day and finally one of the senior guys, he's the most senior guy. He's kind of like the, everybody's mentor on the team. We were talking about his succession plan and not forcing anything, but we were just making plans and we were solving issues. And, it came up and it said, hey, Barry, what do you want? How long do you want to stick around? What do you want? You get to make your own path here. You've earned that. He said, I don't want to leave here before we hit $1 million and $1 billion in net asset value. And so that just changed everything. That just opened everything wide. And so all of a sudden, we had to shift their approach to making them $1 billion net asset value company instead of, 150, 250, 300 or something. We had to change the approach. We had to shorten the timeline as well. And so, in the sense of that visionary thing, my mind is always thinking, how can we keep pushing the limits in a healthy way that just keeps everybody inspired all the time?
Interesting. How do you, I guess my question is, do I need you as a developer or somebody like you? Sell yourself to me.
It's a great question. And it is, I've sold a lot of things in my life. Coaching is one of the hardest things to sell because, it's so undefinable. What I really have to sell to people is, the end game. It's like, hey, do you want to keep prodding along the way you've done? Maybe you're doing well and you're content with that. And that's totally okay. But whatever it is that you want, if you're young, ambitious, you've just always felt like you've been put on this earth to do something great. That's what I do. I help you do that. And I also help you do it because most of my clients, they're 30s, maybe even 20s, but they're guys that they want to do great things. They feel like God's put them on this earth to do something great, but they also understand that they want to be great fathers. They want to be great community members. They want to be great spouses. And so they're really looking to have it all. And I like to think that I help with that to some degree.
Okay. Can you think of maybe common trend or common theme amongst the developers that you work with in terms of what works well for them and what doesn't work well for them?
That's a really good question, Eugene. I do find a lot in this industry. It's very competitive, as you know, can be cutthroat. There are people in this industry that, just like every other industry, that do things well, and there are others that do it an alternative way. And I just think that if we can get leaders in this industry to start focusing on themselves much more, focusing on their vision, keeping their eyes set upon what it is that they want, what they define that they want, I think people, I don't think I know because I've seen it multiple times, are a lot more effective, and they make greater impact on their communities and their teams.
What do you mean by things that they want? I mean, let me rephrase. A lot of people get into development because they want to make money. And it's just as simple as that. Those development companies that have been at it for some time, then they're like, oh, well, we've made the money and making money is great, but we can actually benefit the communities. But for those that are trying to get in, should they?
Should they get into commercial real estate? That's another good question. I ask myself that a lot because I'm in commercial real estate by proxy, but I'm not really one of you guys. I don't that talent level. So I ask myself a lot of times when I was 25 and sort of fledgling around, hadn't really quite figured it out. If I had found commercial real estate back then, would that have been a good option for me? And I'm pretty sure the answer is no. I don't think I had the maturity. I don't think I had the grit to do it at that time. And I probably would have gotten into it seeking wealth, and that, wealth comes when you do things well that you're passionate about. So, uh, I, I would, if I were talking to 25-year-old Ford, I would say, what are the reasons you're doing it for? Is it good reasons? Is it wholesome reasons? Is it reasons that are going to improve your life? Or is it reasons that are vanity inspired? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does. I had an interesting conversation a couple of years ago with a potential client who called me, and we started talking about development and help owners, land owners with their development projects. But this client called and said, I've been investing in real estate. I think he's done maybe a couple of fix and flipses, but he said, I have this small project that I want to do. I want to develop it and I want to build it myself. Can you help me with this? And my question to him was, so you've never done development before. You've done some fix and flipses. There are similarities. That's good. But why do you want to build it yourself? Running a construction company on top of the development company. A lot of people do it, especially in the smaller arena, but there's an extra level of complexity. And he's like, well, I just want to make more money. Why would I want to pay a fee to a third party GC when I can keep it to myself? And I'm like, this is the absolute wrong reason to do it. And we haven't spoke to again. I don't know if I think I reached out, but I think he didn't like my answer. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. First of all, he'd be a terrible coaching candidate. But there's a phrase I use a lot, and ironically in this business, what's your highest and best use? We talk about that with assets all the time. What's its highest and best use? But we don't talk about that about ourselves and our talents. And where best, say, take a gentleman like that. He can't be good at all of those things. And so, if he were being intelligent, he'd think to himself, all right, what am I really good at? Where should I spend the most time? Where can I get the greatest yield for my time? And then I want to partner and have a trusting relationship with other people that have complementary skills.
Yeah. I mean, that was basically my point. And we actually shut down our construction company a few years ago because it was taking up so much time and energy that I realized that it's really hard to do both development and construction. And just from the risk standpoint, you're taking on so much risk when you're developing, but then you're taking on so much more risk when you're building that, especially if you're starting up, I would definitely recommend some of that risk to somebody else.
Yeah. Well, and if you don't mind, Eugene, I don't want this to be conversational. I've been to your website, things like that. I'm curious, what is it that you guys do? Like, what's the value that you guys bring to the market, and what's your niche? What's your vision? Things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we basically provide real estate development management service to the landowners who would love to see their property developed, but don't have enough experience or expertise. And essentially, we are like a, conductor of an orchestra. We are the person or the company that puts together the team, brings in all the engineers, the architects, financing, investors, contractors, and we oversee and manage that entire project from beginning to end. And the difference between us and a typical fee-based developer, because you can always hire a fee-based developer. The fee-based developer is collecting their fee. Whether the project is successful or not, they're typically getting paid, and that's what their business is. they make profit from the services that they provide. In our business, we decided early on, because we've been contractors, we've been developers in the past, we've invested our money in the past. We wanted to be the equivalent of a fee-based developer, but we wanted our landowners to know that we're not making any profit until their project is successful.
Interesting.
And so
How'd you get into this, Eugene?
how did I get into it? I mean, I've got into the industry because my dad's been a contractor, and similar story to yours. He's alive and well, thank God. But he 20 years ago suckered me into joining the business. I never wanted to be the builder, and I always hated construction. I always saw him being stressed out and angry and unhappy, and I'm like, I don't want this for myself. I got my degree in economics, got my MBA, and thought I'd stay in financial services until he lured me into the business, and that was over 20 years ago, and the rest is history. But then, as we were growing and scaling, we saw the niche. We saw that there's a lot of people with development ambitions, but who have no idea what they're doing. And there's a ton of money that's being lost in development because people jump into it without having full understanding of the complexities of the business and the risks that they're taking. And so we saw this niche to grow and expand. It's funny. We recently, just a few days ago, about a week ago, we did a deep search between various different AI engines to see what competition we have. And we found out that there's really nobody else that's like us that does all of those things. There's plenty of fee-based developers out there. There's plenty of co-GPs, they're basically investment companies or investment development companies that would love to take over the project and keep the owner as a co-investor. But there's nobody like us that would do consulting, fee-based development, and also help raise capital for projects, raise financing, manage construction, and defer all of our profits until the project is done.
Yeah, that latter part is the real kicker there. What's the vision for the company? Like, where will you guys be in 3 years?
Well, so right now we're primarily in Washington State, and my goal is to go nationwide. We already get phone calls from different places around the country, from Pacific Northwest, Idaho, Oregon, Montana, to recently we started getting phone calls from the Carolinas, from Florida, Texas. And I'm like, that's great. I just want to be known as the development management company that can help property owners get their sites developed. And I stay focused on multifamily and single family. And that way, I know my niche. And, I think I was on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I said, think of me as Home Depot. If you think of developing land, you call me. If you think of buying household products, you go to Home Depot or you're Lowe's.
Mhm.
So I don't know, maybe a little arrogant of me, but I figured 3 to 5 years, perfectly doable.
Okay. All right. How are you going to get there?
Oh, who the hell knows?
Okay. You asked me earlier, what's my pitch? That's my pitch. I get you from here to there.
Right. So that's that's what I was hoping to get out of you. So the way you the way you propel your way forward is by asking difficult questions that a lot of people don't think about.
Well, and you're exactly right. They always say, why do people teach? It's kind of a insult, but why do people teach? Because they couldn't do, right? Well, that's why it's like I struggle to pitch myself and to say what I'm good at. But I can get you to articulate what I do pretty well,
right,
with a couple of questions.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's perfect. And I love that. A lot of times I get calls from owners who say, hey, I've got this land. I would really love to develop it. I don't know what I need to do, but I'm willing to contribute the land. Can you do everything else for me? And I say, generally, yes, but somebody needs to spend money up front. And they're like, no, I don't want to spend any money up front. Here's the land, you spend all the money. And I'm like, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know who I am. We just met. You could literally be handing me your piece of property that you've had in the family, maybe for generations, maybe recently, but it's yours. And you're asking me to do what with it? And so that is the very first conversation that we have is, first of all, what is your goal? Do you want to build and sell? Do you want to build and hold? So exit strategy is extremely important. But then before you offer anything to anybody, you need to have a package, because you might get lucky and you're dealing with a decent person who's not going to screw you, but you might get unlucky and you will sign an agreement that will literally transfer your property to somebody else's hands. Not Not right away. No, it might happen in 6 months. It might happen in 12 months. But first, to capital calls, because what's going to happen a year from now is nothing like what we think we're doing today. On a
Yeah.
development project, if we don't know what the plan is, if we don't even know what we're developing, if we don't know how much it's going to cost, then it's an open checkbook, if you will, for
Yeah.
somebody else to take over. And that's super important. I spend a lot of time educating people one on one and then through these podcasts and my social media that people need to understand. Development is great. It's a great way to maximize your property's value, to force appreciate your property by
Hmm.
building something on it, or even getting a set of permits to get something built on it. But the earlier on you are, the more risk you're taking. And so you have to weigh those pros and cons. And definitely, like you said, it's not for everybody.
No, you gotta have a little tolerance. How often do people, when they do a deal with you guys, do they actually hold after the project's complete? You mentioned that some people, that's their goal.
Totally dependent on the person and the family. Like one of my favorite clients, when he first called me, he said parents have been accumulating these properties for the last few decades and they are now transferred into the trust, and the family's or the trust's mandate is to not sell the land. He's like, do whatever you have to do with it. It has to be income producing. And we may agree to carve out some portions to sell it if we need to help finance this. We can work with investors, but we will never sell it, at least not for the foreseeable future. It has to stay in the family. And so there's that. Or my other client that I'm working with right now, they said, make it for sale. We might want to keep one of the units in the development when it's done, but everything else is good to be sold.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. So I live in Pinehurst, North Carolina, or actually Southern Pines. Most people have heard of Pinehurst. But I'm in Greenville, South Carolina. And I don't know if you've heard of Greenville, but Greenville is one of the hottest places in the country. And they're doing a great job here. But I'm staying on in this hotel on this property that the family owned a Pepsi bottling packaging company here in Greenville. And I
Mhm.
think they were the big Pepsi bottlers here. And they sold that a couple of years ago, but they had about 430, 450 acres behind the facility that was, raw undeveloped land. And that's sort of what they did. And I don't know that they had any restrictions on it, but they decided to take that land, develop it. And they've developed, I'm looking out the window now, they've developed it into a really upscale hotel, an upscale neighborhood. They've just done it, very thoughtfully and just first class all around. And it's really neat to see, obviously in pro development, you see certain types of land that you think, hey, that, some land should be preserved. But the middle ground is doing a great development that really serves the community the right way. Serving as sort of a steward of the land as well. And
Yeah.
it's interesting. That's the cool thing about development is it's just, it's just a 360-degree industry, and some people do it well and some people don't. And it's really neat when you see people use the land really well and complement it like that.
Yeah, well, especially when you consider the community overall. It's funny. I keep repeating this phrase, this quote. I heard it. I can't remember who said it, but it's probably like 15 years ago. But the guy said, you can't change a neighborhood $1 at a time, but you can definitely change a neighborhood $1 billion at a time. And when you see these huge developments like that with multiple buildings, multiple uses, you're like, yeah, this truly transforms the community. But I love working on smaller infills, the little 8 to 10 unit townhome development, infill, inner city is just as rewarding as building, an entire city block or, 400 plus acres like that. Just because you can, my favorite feeling is to know that whatever we developed or built, that there are people living there. That's why I love
Yeah.
residential so much. Is that we drive by and my kids recognize it, and then we see light in the windows, and we see people going in and out. It's such a rewarding feeling to know that what you spend so much time and energy on is still being enjoyed by people today.
Yeah, because you build a legacy instead of an asset. And I remember my dad, he would drive me crazy because every time we would have some guests come into town, he'd drive them down the main throughway in our town and say, "Oh, I worked on that 10 years ago, and oh, I worked on that, and we've touched about everything on this boulevard here." And of course, that would drive me nuts because things like that drive you nuts about your parents. But those are the things that you remember and those are the important legacy items, and that's the coolest thing about real estate. So I own 4 other companies, and one of them is a master planning company. We do a lot of land planning. And one of our values is that we'll only do work that leaves a legacy. Internal approaches, we want to be the first call for the second national mall. So we want to do work that's recognizable, and that when people see our sign on something before it gets developed, they know that it's going to be something really unique, thoughtful, and first class. And that's the coolest thing about real estate, is the impact that it makes on a community. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons I was attracted to real estate when I got into coaching was because I was selling to commercial real estate companies as a landscaping business owner. And I always thought, man, that work looks really cool. I know it's not easy, but they're all really smart. They're all really good community members for the most part. It was kind of idealistic. And so it's been really cool for me to, be able to rub shoulders with people like you guys.
What are some of the big mistakes that you see developers make?
The tactical stuff I can't really judge because I'm not a practitioner. But it's trying to cram 10 years of progress into one deal. It goes back to the comment I made earlier that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And so the guys that were really progressing, and doing exponential growth in just a couple of years, well, they've got a discipline. They have a process that they have stuck to and been committed to. That they're not dealing with 5 different asset types. They're building relationships in one area, and they're doing those deals over and over and over again. And they're just becoming masters at their craft. And that's why they're scaling the way they're doing. But, what do they say? I'm a 10-year overnight success. You ever heard that phrase? Yeah. And so a lot of the people that we see in the community that are doing great things or in this industry, there was some buildup there behind the scenes. They're working with guys like me, trying to do things the right way. So my advice would be, flow is smooth and smooth is fast. Commit to a path, stick to it, and master your territory, your niche, etc.
Thank you. Yeah, that's powerful. Was that the advice that you would have given to my question in the beginning, or is there something else?
Okay, so I've listened to a couple of your interviews, so I knew the question was coming. Second of all, I knew that would come up throughout our discussion anyway, because that's just the way these conversations go, I think.
Excellent. About coaching, you did touch on this point. I see a ton of coaches being spawned over the last probably few years, especially in the podcasting arena. Everybody's a coach of something or other. Give me some pros and cons about getting a coach and maybe being a coach.
Yeah. So the average Olympian has about 11 coaches. It's nutrition. I don't even know all of them, but as a coach, I say everybody needs a coach, including me. I wrote a LinkedIn post earlier this week about my freshman year high school basketball coach, and my goodness, we hated him. We couldn't stand him. But I found myself looking for him. I can barely remember his name because it's been 30 years now. I found myself looking for him online a couple of weeks ago because it had dawned on me a little while back that he had a huge impact on my life because, the coaches we had that I had the next couple of years, they weren't as good. And I started to wonder, what could I have accomplished had I had 3 more years with him, even though I didn't like him and I couldn't stand being around him. I wonder what kind of basketball player I'd be right now. And, there are good coaches and bad coaches out there in business. But I do agree that, me included, we all need one to drive, to get the best from us, but also to help us understand that, when we think we're done, what is it? As David Goggins says, when we think we've hit the wall, we're at 40%. We need that push. We need somebody that believes in us and knows that we can do more. Because I believe that's what we're on this earth for.
Excellent. And so for the developers out there who are thinking of getting a coach, obviously we'll have your contact information if they want to reach out, but what are some of the things that they should ask their prospective coach about? How do they qualify one?
Yeah. Do you want to be pushed? Do you believe that there's something greater that you can do? If you were to reach out to me, I'd say, hey, I'm not really good at selling myself. I just struggle with that. Here's 3 of my clients. Call them, and you can have any of my clients. You can talk to any of them, former or current, and they'll be able to tell you the value I bring.
Beautiful. Beautiful. What is the contact information where people can get a hold of you, Forth?
Yeah, HeffnerIV.com is my website, or I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, Forth, F-O-R-T-H, Heffner with 2 Fs instead of 1.
Excellent. Excellent. And we'll definitely have those in show notes. Anything else that we should talk about today that we haven't covered yet?
I don't think so, but go get that 3-year goal. Get nationwide, Eugene.
Real estate development.